Hello, and welcome to Wise Up with Open Water, your regular dose of wisdom from the open water community. I'm your host, Ken Pasternak, an Open Water founding member, as well as a contributor. And I'm happy to welcome Jeff Peduto to today's episode, during which we'll be talking about how organizations can rethink cost, operations, and consulting models to drive sustainable performance in today's environment. Jeff is the founder and principal of Strategic Operations Solutions, where he helps organizations improve performance through process engineering, strategic planning, and operational excellence. With more than 20 years of experience across industries, including healthcare, insurance, and recruitment marketing, Jeff has built and led high-performing operations functions in complex, growth-oriented environments. He's had senior leadership roles at companies such as Recruitix, United Healthcare, and the Hartford, where he specialized in scaling organizations, driving efficiency, and leading enterprise-wide transformation initiatives. Through his affiliation with the ERA Group, Jeff also helps companies identify cost optimization opportunities that directly improve margins and cash flow. Lastly, and I find this super cool, Jeff is a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt and a certified change management practitioner. Jeff, welcome, and thanks for joining me.
That's a great introduction, Ken. Thank you. You probably summed my whole life up in about 2 minutes. Thank you for
Well, you
that.
cover a
Well,
lot of
happy to be
ground,
here.
and I think what's interesting is, I kind of emphasize in my intro today's environment. I imagine
Yeah.
today's environment has got a lot of dynamics that are really feeling pretty warm to people, feeling pretty real to
hmm
organizations. And I'm glad we're having this conversation because I think there's some timely stuff that we're going to talk about today that our community can take back to their own organizations or to their own practices. So I'd love to start with a discussion on cost reduction and your perspective that cost reduction should be treated as a strategic board level priority rather than what many call treated as a reactive exercise. Um, what drives that perspective and maybe why that shift is important right now?
Yeah, I mean, what's driving that shift is really simple. Companies now are realizing that protecting their margin is often faster and far more controllable than chasing new revenue.
Uh-huh.
A lot of boards have been laser focused on growth, right? Increasing sales, winning new customers, launching new products, and that's where their energy goes. That's where the resources go, and that's where strategic priorities tend to live. When cost reduction comes up, it's usually framed around internal efficiency, like process improvement, productivity. Can we do more with less? And that matters, right? But what often gets overlooked is supplier spend. That's the part that drives me a little bit crazy because if you ask executives what's more valuable, retaining an existing customer or acquiring a new one, they're almost always going to say retaining that customer. And why? Because the revenue is already in the business. It's easier to
Mm-hmm.
protect that than to replace it.
Mm-hmm.
Same logic applies to cost. And so, like, that money's already in your business. You're just letting it walk out the door. Yet many companies don't apply the same strategic discipline to protecting their margin like they do growing revenue. They wait until something becomes painfully obvious. They sort the balance sheet like Z to A, see which that giant expense line at the top, and let's go after that. But they often ignore the 10 or 20 categories that are just below the line, that individually are smaller, but collectively represent a much larger opportunity. And that's where a lot of the real working capital lives. What's changing now in the environment: inflation, supply chain disruption, geopolitical instability, vendor pricing, all of these things, those are pressures that are hitting businesses really hard now.
Mm-hmm.
Revenue growth is harder to generate than it was a few years ago, and suppliers are under the same pressure. And so, here's the important mind shift. You're the revenue source as the company of your suppliers. They're trying to protect and grow their margins too,
Mm-hmm.
often by taking more of yours. So that's why cost optimization has to become this board level strategy. It's not can't be a reactive exercise anymore when margins get tight because improving EBITDA, it isn't always about selling more. Sometimes it's just keeping what you already have,
Mm-hmm.
right? that make
Yeah.
sense?
Makes a lot of sense. Actually, it brings up a lot of questions in my head because I like the idea of a mind shift and the idea that you have more leverage than you think you do as an organization. I
Hmm.
think that, and it's not always the big number at the top of the balance sheet, as you said. It can be a lot of smaller things that add up. I think all that's really important. How do you see organizations manage or process that mind shift from, you know, I think most organizations would say we're not going to save our way to success. We still have to grow, right? We still have to
Hmm.
protect our margins. We still have to grow our business. How do you help them make that mind shift to, these are two companions. They're not one drives the other, or one has to react when times get tight. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think where most organizations get this wrong is
Uh-huh.
they don't think about cost the same way they think about revenue.
Okay.
Revenue gets strategy, it gets attention, it gets dashboards, it gets accountability and leadership focus. Cost is often treated as just the unavoidable price of doing business, something
Mm,
fixed, something you manage only when it becomes painful. That mindset, that's the mistake, right?
hmm
That's the shift that has to happen. Leaders need to reframe cost optimization as a growth strategy, not a defensive tactic, because the resources you need to grow your business are often already inside your business. You just have to go find them. And too
hmm
often, leadership teams are stuck working in the business instead of working on the business.
hmm hmm
They're buried in day to day execution, solving immediate problems, putting out fires, but not stepping back to ask, where are we leaking margin? Where are we overpaying? And where can we create working capital without increasing revenue? That's where a lot of the real opportunity is. And
hmm
cost optimization is much bigger than just negotiating a better price.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it's pricing, and sometimes it's contract structure. Sometimes it's finding a better supplier with stronger service or better terms. Sometimes you switch products entirely. Sometimes it's just an operational change internally that is a workflow improvement, better resource allocation, eliminating some unnecessary complexity that reduces cost and improves performance at the same time. So the goal
hmm
isn't just cost cutting for the sake of cutting.
hmm
And that's where companies sometimes get nervous because they associate cost reduction with sacrifice, with
mm
layoffs, lower
hmm
quality, slowing growth. Real cost optimization should do the opposite. It should free up capital to invest in growth, strengthen supplier relationships, improve operational efficiency. Um, and I'll tell you that where I've seen companies do the best is when the leaders stop asking, where can we cut? And they start asking, where can we optimize so we can grow? Which makes it a very completely different conversation and a much more strategic one at the leadership level.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so that's back to the mind shift. I really appreciate you kind of illustrating that. Not to put you on the spot and not to
Yeah.
expose the dirty laundry from companies that you work with, but can you think of moments where the light bulb went on for somebody and they got it? They said, "Oh, I see that this is optimization." Are there examples in which you've identified those opportunities where it's helped an organization see that this is possible?
Yeah. I mean, I can't disclose names
Sure.
and places, right? But I think what is fascinating, and I actually posted on this on LinkedIn either today or yesterday. What's fascinating to us is um, when that light bulb goes off, and there's so many different applications where that light bulb can go off. Um, off I've spoken to customers who have when we talk about what are the areas where we could optimize, and um, they eliminate a few right off the bat because we've already got a contract, we're already in place there. There's nothing we can do with that. It's we can't find anything to grow our business there. And then we go, okay, fair enough, but can we take a look at the contract anyway? And we do. And a few weeks later, they got rebates coming in, and that's additional cash flow into their business. And all of a sudden, they can fund something they couldn't fund before.
Mm,
And we've had so many scenarios where the customer doesn't think it can happen because they've been told their framework is so hardwired. Um, but then we come in and we introduce them things that they may not have thought about, and then
hmm
they go, "Wait a minute, we just saved $1 million over here on our packaging. Let's take a look at some of the other areas where we're spending money because what's sitting under the rug there that you
Mm-hmm.
guys could uncover for us. And then they start to get it. Then they start to realize, oh, this isn't just $1,000 here, $2,000 there, rounding errors on my books. This is real working capital that I can use to fund. I can hire a new SDR because these are annual savings are happening every year. It's fascinating, and it's always a lot of fun for us when we see that light bulb go off, um, because it's always nice to when you know something and then someone else figures it out.
And I mean, when you come back and say, "I've found money," I can't imagine that's ever bad news for anybody.
No, no, not at all. And the things it's funny. That's on the expense side. On the process improvement side, when you analyze, these companies and the people that work there, they get so embedded in the business, right? Like I talked
Mm-hmm.
about earlier, working in the business versus working on the business, and they get so embedded in the day to day that everything looks so complex that
Mm-hmm.
when you take more of, say, a Six Sigma or a lean view of the operation, and you really distill things down to root cause from an outsider's point of view, some of the simplest adjustments can make massive impact.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always fun to see too. And it's not always on the cost side of things.
I have an example of that occurred to me a long time ago, and it's not really as much about cost as it is about revenue, I would say. But I just want to
Mm.
share it with you because it was a light bulb moment for me. I was working with a major university, a major public research university, and cost is a very big issue for these universities. And where are they going to find the money to cover those costs, especially with the federal government kind of slowing down in its support? Um, they brought in a guy from the outside, from finance world, who came in and looked at how they were, managing their overall budget, and he was struck that they take in all this money for tuition at the beginning of the year, and that money gets spent over time, but they
Hmm.
weren't investing the float. They were not investing that money in ways that would enable them to make a little bit of money while they were also covering their costs. And
Hmm.
he just changed that one thing, and it made a tremendous difference because we're talking about a lot of money coming in for a big university with tens of thousands of students.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
it's not it's there's nothing illegal or untoward in doing that. It's just like how do we make ourselves more capable of serving our audiences with the resources that we already have? And it sounds
Yeah.
like you're doing a
It's
lot
the
of those types of things.
it can be the smallest things. You asked for an example, and I just thought of one. We
Okay.
were working with a hospitality group, right, a hotel chain, and one of their um, major value propositions to the market was that they were environmentally friendly. And so
Mm-hmm.
everything that they used down to their janitorial staff had, environmentally friendly tags on them. And our guys got in and got very, very granular in some of the products and supplies that they used. And they found that they were using these sponges, these environmentally friendly sponges that were costing them double what a
Mm.
normal sponge would cost anybody. And our guys took a look at it and saw and figured out what it was made from and what it was. And what they realized was this sponge was simply the same sponge that you and I could buy in a restaurant, not in a restaurant, in a grocery store, but it just had an environmentally friendly sticker on it.
Mm.
So they were able to swap out because it was the exact same sponge. There was nothing special about it. They swapped it out, bought it wholesale, reduced the cost of that sponge by, I think, like 75%, and just stuck a bunch of stickers on it. Like
Mm.
that's the kind of simple stuff that can make a big difference if you're buying stuff like that in large volume.
Yeah. No, that's a great. I mean, you said it's the small
Mhm.
things, and sponges are pretty small, but
Yeah,
they add up. I,
that's it.
Building on that, you've said that sometimes organizations will invest in improvement programs, but they're a point in
Mm.
time, and they struggle to sustain it over a longer period of time. Why does that happen, and what's the unlock for something like that?
The biggest reason improvement programs fail to stick is organizations treat them like projects instead of living systems.
Okay.
They think there's a clear start and a finish line. Launch the initiative, implement the new process, complete the transformation, and then they move on.
Mm.
Operational improvement doesn't work that way. These programs don't really have an end point. They have a start point, and then they have a maintenance phase. And that maintenance phase never ends. Processes, systems, behaviors are living things. And if you don't maintain them, they naturally will degrade.
Hmm.
People will drift back into old habits, workarounds start creeping in, priorities start to shift, new employees come in without the same
Mm.
training as the
Yeah.
existing employees. And before long, the organization quietly slides back into an old way of operating. And 2 years later, the leadership says, "Didn't we just fix this?" And the answer is yes, yes, you did, but you stopped managing it. And that's where most companies get it wrong. Right? They invest in the launch, but not in the sustainment of it, and they don't assign real process ownership. They don't maintain the measurement routines. They stop reviewing the KPIs. They don't refresh training. They don't create accountability for protecting the gains. And they just want to show that they made an improvement, but then they don't invest in keeping it. So that's why
Hmm.
so many organizations end up paying to solve the same problem twice. Sustainable improvements require discipline. After
Yeah.
all the excitement is gone, after you've raised the mission accomplished flag, it's
Yeah.
not the project that creates long-term value, it's the operating rhythm that follows it. And so the companies that do this well understand that continuous improvement isn't an initiative, it's more of their management philosophy. It's just how we
Hmm.
do business.
Hmm. Yeah, I can
I,
imagine. What I'm hearing is that this is not just not a point in time. It is a process, and also even a cultural thing for an organization to make sure that they are. This is a part of who they are. This is a part of
mm,
not only how they do things, but why they do things. It's almost a way of life. I think about your Six Sigma black belt, because to
mm.
me the term black belt and its connotations, are this is a philosophy. This is a way of life. It's not just a check the box. I've got a certification.
Mhm.
And so I'm seeing that this type of change, this type of optimization, as you talk about it, really does need to be embedded in the organization,
Culturally.
not just a management decision. If that makes sense.
It does. I mean, it is a cultural thing, and I can't tell you if I got my certification decades ago, but
Okay.
I got it in the insurance world, and that's where I applied it first. But I have applied that in almost every area of my life.
Hmm.
It is a way of thinking. It's a methodology. It's a cultural strategy when you apply it to companies. Um, and so, when I the most common things, the most common failure things that I usually see
Hmm.
is the 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 ownership and the discipline doesn't follow. Right?
Uh-huh.
Most organizations know what they need to improve, and then the breakdown happens in making sure someone truly owns it,
Mm.
and that's where they usually break down. Like identifying when you're done, who's accountable, what exactly are they responsible for delivering? How do we measure that success? How often do we review it? What happens when the performance starts slipping? Like if you think about those 5 questions, um, that can apply to almost anywhere in life if you want
Hmm.
something to stick.
Hmm.
And regardless of whether it's applying it in your personal life or your professional life, if those answers aren't clear, the improvement doesn't last.
Hmm.
You know, a lot of companies will launch change with real enthusiasm, but without that accountability structure behind it, like there's no
Hmm.
owner, there's no dashboards, there's not reviewing the metrics as we talked about earlier, and that's where the improvement dies, right? Quietly,
Hmm.
it just slowly goes away, and the other thing that I see companies do is they treat their
Hmm.
business like it has multiple 1 year lives. Right?
Oh.
Every January or every new fiscal year, priorities reset. New initiatives show up, old ones get deprioritized. People behave as if the business was somehow reborn between December 31st and January 1st.
Hmm.
Processes don't work that way. Right? A
Yeah.
process doesn't start on January 1st and end at the end of the year. It doesn't care about your fiscal calendar. It's a living system that
Hmm.
evolves over time. So, you know, when they treat it like an annual event,
Hmm.
that's when they lose momentum. They lose
Mm-hmm.
institutional learning. They end up rewarding activity
Mm-hmm.
versus rewarding outcomes.
Yeah.
And that creates a very expensive cycle of solving problems over and over again for a business.
Yeah.
Um, what it really takes to create the lasting change, and this is the cultural part you started with, permission to think long term.
Mm.
Leaders have to stop celebrating the announcement of change and start rewarding the maintenance of it, and build it into the accountability into roles and not
Mm.
just side projects. Because your lasting change, it's not created by just one big transformation.
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen it tried to be done that way over and over again
Yeah.
in my professional career.
Yeah.
It's got to be it's got to be consistent operational discipline over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate that. In the space that I work in, which is really more about brand and brand definition and operation, it's the same thing. If you take your eye off the ball, if you lose sight of who you are, you start to become whatever your audience wants you to be. It destroys all that important work. Even if you
Sure.
had a really great story to begin with, it gets diluted without focus and accountability and systems, as you're saying. So I can
Yeah.
relate from a different discipline. I'm wondering. So you mentioned earlier that you find clients sometimes find themselves paying for the same thing twice. Because
Mm.
they didn't systematize it, they didn't make it part of their overall processes. And you've also talked about rethinking the consulting model from pay, around this idea of pay for performance, perhaps, versus pay for activity, as you just identified before. Um,
Yeah.
how does that model look in practice, and how does that help a client start to make this more of a system and a cultural thing than just a point in time or a transaction?
Yeah, I'm big on this. Right? I think only because I've been on the other side. Right?
Mm,
I think the last thing any client wants is buyer's remorse.
yeah.
And unfortunately, the traditional consulting model often creates exactly that. Too often, clients are paying for time, materials, meetings, expertise up front, retainers, milestone payments, hourly billing, regardless of whether their business is actually getting the result they were hoping for. Those payments are fixed, the outcome often isn't. That creates risk because the client
Hmm.
starts wondering, did I actually get any value or did I just buy activity?
Hmm.
And so I believe the consulting should be built around outcomes, not effort. And I'm often, a lot of people disagree with me, but the first conversation should always be what needs to be true for this engagement to be considered a success? What outcomes are we trying to create for the business? And that could
Hmm.
be cost savings, it could be efficiency, it
Sure.
could be EBITDA improvement. There's a number of things that it could be. But once that's clear, the consultant should be very honest about whether they can actually deliver it.
Mm,
And if they can, the pricing should then reflect the value of that outcome, not just the number of hours it takes to get there.
hmm.
That's how we approach it, especially through my partnership with the Era Group on the spend reduction, cost reduction side of things. In cost optimization, we don't believe we've created any value unless we have created measurable savings on the client's balance sheet. If we don't save actual cash, we don't charge them a dime. The
Mm,
client's not paying for our time, right? They're paying for our results. And so that changes the relationship completely. It creates real alignment instead of tension. Both sides are focused on the exact same thing, business impact. And it also forces discipline on the consultant. You have to be honest up front. If a client's asking for something you can't realistically deliver, you have to say that. You
hmm.
define success together, you agree on how to be measured and validate it afterwards so there's no ambiguity, and that builds trust.
Hmm.
Because at the end of the day, we take our clients' resources seriously. If they're spending money with us, they should feel confident and not regretful that the engagement made their business stronger. And
Hmm.
so for us, that's what pay for performance really, really means. Got to
Hmm.
put value.
Yeah, there's a real incentive
Mhm.
there for the client to buy in because they're basic. I mean, I thought just came. I mean, you have contingency attorneys, right? Who will take a
Mhm.
case and they will bill only on success. They bill a lot when they're successful because
Yeah.
it's worth the effort, right, to both parties. This is a little bit different, but you're basically saying, again, if I find the money, if we find the EBITDA or whatever that is defined as, then
Hmm.
we're rewarded for the effort because that was what the effort was designed to produce.
Yeah. I don't love the analogy with the lawyer because I don't want to be compared to them. But fair.
Yeah,
The analogy is right.
yeah,
Um, but I think, and I think there's really something to take away from that, and that is when you don't get what you're paying for,
hmm,
that's when you feel the buyer's remorse. That's when you feel the regret.
right,
If you pay more, but you got what you wanted and it's valuable to your business owners rarely ever regret spending that money
yeah.
because they got what they're, even if it cost them a little bit extra than it would have in another direction, they know they got what they were looking for.
It was focused.
And that's important.
Yeah, it's focused on a goal. It was targeted towards an outcome that they agreed was important and valuable to them, and they got it. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
I once had a client that was in the workers' comp space,
Mm,
and they were not an insurance company. They were more of a case manager. But what they would
okay.
do is they'd go into, let's say, a large manufacturer who has a very complex workman's comp case where someone was injured on the job and usually very significantly injured. And they would
Mm.
say, we can bring this person back to this level of functionality in this amount of time for this cost. And we only get paid if we actually deliver on that. And it was a very similar thing because they know what they're capable of, they know what their resources are, they know how to manage the network of providers, and they have the actuaries to help them understand how the realities might work out. And
Mhm.
for the employer, it's a very predictable thing. For the insurer, it becomes a very predictable thing, and they're willing to pay out for the result that they expect to get. So that's what I'm hearing
Absolutely.
from you. It's just like you align at the beginning, and everything else feels much more real and is never regretted at the end.
100%. And one of the things you said at the start of that was one of the most important things is that a consultant has to know what they're capable of delivering.
Yeah.
Don't just promise what the customer wants. Know what you
Hmm.
can deliver. And if you can't deliver something they want, you have to tell them. That
Hmm.
even of it, if a supplier comes to me and says, listen, what you're asking for, I can't do, I have more trust in that supplier than the guy who promises me the world and under delivers.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, you're kind of sitting at this intersection of strategy and execution. It sounds like you from your
Yeah.
own perspective, what are we going to be able to do to deliver on this client's needs, and how do we actually back it up? On the
Yeah.
client side, it's what are those optimization strategies, and how do we keep them going?
Yeah. Absolutely.
What's for that second example, the client who is taking your advice and implementing the things that you've done, but you want to make sure that they systematize it, they turn it into a process with accountability, and it's not refreshed every year, as you said earlier. How can they look for the vulnerabilities and fix those vulnerabilities so that that doesn't break down that connection between strategy and execution?
Um, a lot of that, for those who are Lean Six Sigma
Mm-hmm.
trained, they'll know what I'm talking about. A lot of that sits in the genesis of what lean management is about.
Okay.
It's not that the senior leader has to be able to understand the vulnerabilities, it's that it has to become part of how their middle management runs the business.
Okay.
The middle management is structured in a way that they own not just the people and the function, but they own the process. And they own the management of that process. And that process tells them things because they have metrics that are reporting out on the performance of that process. So when that becomes just part of how you structure your organization around the ownership of the process, those vulnerabilities as part of their normal routines get surfaced up to leadership. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when leadership can then do something about it, either strategically or from an execution perspective. But the middle management is really what you're going to lean on because you're going to give them the tools to know what's happening in that process and to see trends getting a little out of whack before it becomes too serious and you start
Uh-huh.
losing all the benefits.
I see. I see. So it's really understanding the criteria, really understanding the process, and understanding what to look for in terms of red flags or red lights to fix those things as you go, rather
Hmm.
than let the whole thing kind of wind down or break down before you get
Yeah.
reactive.
Yeah. Don't wait for it to become, at the top of your Z to A list.
Uh-huh.
At that point, you've lost all your improvements. So, and
Yeah,
you want to catch it before it happens.
makes total sense. Makes great sense. So, believe it or not, Jeff, we're kind of getting towards the end of our time here. I'm curious if you could sum up some of the advice that you've imparted over the last half hour. What are some of the
Yeah.
key takeaways you'd want our listeners to walk away with?
Uh, let's see. I Three things.
Okay.
Right. Um, First, processes and projects are living things. They're
Hmm.
not set it and forget it. Right?
Mm.
Too many companies will build a process, launch a system, and assume the work is done. Businesses evolve, customers change, teams change, so much can change. What worked a year ago may be creating friction today. And if you don't invest in the maintenance, optimization, continuous improvement, you're going to pay for it again.
Mm.
Second, pay for outcomes, not activity. Right?
Mm.
Whether you are hiring internally or engaging a consultant, define success early. Too many times, as we mentioned, companies are paying for time and meetings. I'm a big believer in performance-based models where that's operational improvement, cost savings, strategic execution, because accountability should exist on both sides of the table. Um, it may feel more expensive up front, but you rarely will regret paying for real results. And then the third thing is, don't confuse being busy with being effective. A
Mm.
lot of leadership teams are running fast, but not always in the right direction. Uh, Activity can create the illusion of progress. And I've
Hmm.
seen that a lot, right? The better question is, are your people, your spend, your systems, are they aligned to the outcomes that actually matter? Because it's not about adding complexity. It's about just creating clarity for everyone and that everybody's moving in the same direction. So at the end of the day, strategy is important, but execution is what gets remembered.
Mm. That's great. That's a really great way to wrap this up. And by the way, I'm going to go back and look at how much I'm spending on my sponges and see if I can't find a little bit of weekend fun
There you
in
go.
that area of expense. In all seriousness, how could first of all, you've given us a lot of in this half hour here, a lot of expertise, and I really appreciate it. I know the community is listening. What can the open water community do for you, Jeff?
Mm. Uh, referrals, and more referrals.
Okay.
Listen, referrals to business owners, finance leaders, who are in control of their operations. What we do and the relationships we create are built on trust,
Hmm.
and these our clients have to trust us because we're handling their business, their baby,
Hmm.
right? And oftentimes they're sensitive financial data. So um, the best engagements that we have had have been when a trusted connection introduces us to a business owner or a CFO.
Hmm.
So that's really where people can help me.
Fantastic. And how can listeners reach you if they'd like to follow up or make a connection for you?
Best email would that one I check daily is jpeduto at eragroup.com. That's JPEDUTO at eragroup.com. They can also just call me directly, right? 203-787-8737. I'm also easy to find on LinkedIn. They can check out the Era Group website at www.eragroup.com. And they can find my page on there by just using the Find a Consultant section.
Fantastic, Jeff. Well, thank you again so much. This has been great.
Yeah.
Super
Thanks for
interesting. I
having me.
mean, you might talk about cost optimization as people are like, okay, well, that's going to be a snooze, but actually, the
Right.
stories are great. And that's one of the reasons I love doing this podcast is that I get to meet people like you with a great deal of expertise in an area that I know very little about, but it connects to everything else.
Yeah.
Immediately, it connects to everything else. And so I really appreciate you putting some color to it and helping us understand how it works and how it should work and what you're passionate about. All of it's really great.
Thank you, Ken. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Jeff.
All right. Take care.
You too.